Liar. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Monday, June 28th, 2021, coming to the end of June. Almost ready to do the Happy July thing, and I think we're allowed to be happy. I've been put off all of the national holidays since I was admonished not to be happy or to enjoy, I guess, my Memorial Day weekend. It's one thing to say, enjoy, of course, the deaths of American soldiers. No, we don't enjoy that. Enjoy the long weekend? Well, sometimes we do that. But as you know, people have difficulty separating fact from fiction, for one thing, but ideas from concrete realities. And as a matter of fact, another example of that over the weekend, one I hadn't paid a great deal of attention to, but apparently at some point I missed it entirely. I missed everything entirely, but I guess Joe Biden, he's the president of the United States, referred to America as, or I guess referred to the idea of America, or that America was an idea, or I don't know. I missed the whole thing. And apparently that actually drove conservatives up the wall, which is a weird thing, because I sort of thought that they would be pleased with that sort of language, that America was an ideal, perhaps, of some sort, or that there was this idea/ideal of America that we needed to live up to, which is ordinarily a patriotic and conservative thing. And apparently, I don't know what they were saying. I actually didn't see or hear the president say anything about that. I saw it repeated, I guess, on Twitter, because that's where I get all my news. And it better be a damn good news source, too, because I don't want to find out that this is like getting all your news from YouTube or Fox News, for that matter, which really, I don't see why it wouldn't be like that. I mean, quite honestly, it could be pretty easily manipulated. But the good part about Twitter is that you have the opportunity to disbelieve all news that doesn't come with an appropriate link. Or, of course, you can go and try and find it elsewhere by Googling. So there's at least that. If you're on Twitter and getting your news from Twitter, you at least have access to a computer that you can use to check the background and facts of the news, and that's helpful. And I guess that should be the case for YouTube, but you're too busy watching the videos to get out of YouTube and go check things out on Google. And Twitter, at least, I think, generally speaking, gives you the opportunity. I mean, YouTube gives you the opportunity to turn your head away. And the problem is with the people watching it, I guess, is the real issue. Fox News, not so much. You're watching television. You're just sort of a captive audience. Anyway, I happened to see people discussing it over the weekend. And again, there's another thing I didn't pay a great deal of attention to because I couldn't believe it was an issue. But that's no longer the way you can consume news these days. But yes, expressing, well, they were having this discussion of America being an idea and just watching people answer, no, it isn't. It's a country. Like the most literal-minded response you could possibly come back with. Well, I understand that it is actually, a nation state, etc. It's a country. It's got borders and a flag and everything. But, it could also be an idea. But I don't know. For some reason, that drove them up the wall just because they're addicted to outrage, I guess, is basically what it's about. So we'll round a lot of that up because that's what we do after a weekend. The Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. This is the announcement that tells you that we're going to do this stuff for the next couple of hours, thanks to Bill in Portland, Maine. And I'm sure he's glad he's not in Portland, Oregon, where it's 5 million degrees, apparently. That I paid attention to over the weekend. Hottest temperatures on record for much of the area. I think Canada's record-breaking temperature for anywhere in the country, which is, I guess, I don't know how difficult that is to actually break that record. It's Canada. It's very northerly and generally speaking pretty cold. But the Pacific Northwest got like Las Vegas desert plus heat over the weekend, and I guess still for the next couple of days. And I imagine it's not just going to stay there. It's going to move our way, and we'll eventually get that. It's going to be in the 90s here today, but that's normal summer temperature. I don't know that George Washington would have agreed, but normal for the the last couple of years, last couple of decades anyway. So where were we? Kagro in the Morning radio show is live now. Kagro X wonders why President Biden hasn't ordered a very beautiful July 4th parade, very, very beautiful, with tanks and everything, beautiful tanks, down Pennsylvania Avenue with all our tanks and rocket launchers, just to killjoy, I guess. And maybe the thing is, he's been paying too much attention to reviving the economy and vaccinating people, not enough attention to having the Continental Army take over the airports, which is really where our attention, I guess, ought to be. All right, plenty happening this morning. Greg has, of course, the abbreviated pundit roundup, so we'll await his report there. I could read it all to you now, and then it would be an interesting experiment. What will Greg do now that I've read you the entire abbreviated pundit roundup? Well, I'm not going to bother with any of that. Oh, and I've been corrected here. I was just having a little COVID chat this morning, and I happened to notice, what did I see today? Oh, let's see. That somebody here, just a regular person like you and me, Ron French, projects editor and senior writer at Bridge, Michigan, but also dad. So just thought I would throw that in there. Also a rum and bacon enthusiast, which I assume he has separately. And on that basis, probably can have agreement with Bill. But rum and bacon together, I don't know. Well, we'll check in. We'll see what Bill has to say about that. But he was just mentioning, I guess kind of out of the blue, saying 1 in 10 Michiganders, as he is a Michigander himself, have had COVID. That's true. Michigan actually just over the weekend passed the mark of 100,000 cases per million, which would put them at 10% of the population having reported anyway a COVID-19 infection. But also noting that of those people who have actually gotten or been diagnosed with COVID through the testing program, 1 in every 50 of them have died from COVID. And that reminds me of back in the early days of the pandemic when Donald Trump assured everyone, of course, it's just the flu, and that he estimated that the true death rate of the disease was going to be about 0.5%, which he put at about where the flu was. But apparently, one, he was wrong about the numbers of how many people would actually die from COVID. And two, it turns out he's also wrong about the morbidity, I forget which word we're supposed to use, Greg, of the flu. But Mark Sumner has jumped in to correct me that the actual case fatality rate, that's the word he's using, of the flu is well below 0.1%. So even in the best of circumstances, COVID is about 15 times higher. And that does ring a bell. That we were being told something about 12 times higher right in the beginning days of how deadly COVID actually was. But yeah, that's the case. Nationally, we're at about 1.8% of the number of people reported infected with COVID through the testing program, which again is probably a severe undercount. About 1.8% of the people who have reported positive for COVID in the entire country have actually died from it. In New Jersey, where the numbers are the worst, it's over 2.5%. So then even there, 5 times the death rate that Donald Trump assured everybody we shouldn't be worried about anyway, but if we were going to worry, it would be about 5%. It's about 4 to 5 times higher in many of the states, but that's not news that he didn't know what he was talking about and was severely underplaying the risks. But that is in the news. So why don't we just let Greg get started and just say, hi, good morning, Greg. And I'll bet we'll end up back on this topic eventually anyway.
We might. But the thing that I said early on is that if you want to compare it to flu, compare it to 1918 flu.
Oh, yes, the very bad flu. Sure, why not? And I'm watching rewatching Downton Abbey, and that happens there. So very topical for those of us who just live through fiction.
Right.
Which I recommend, by the way.
If COVID caused deaths at the same rate as the 1918 epidemic, then we'd lose about 2 million people.
Well,
but as it turns out, we're getting close to 1 million.
Yeah, it's been pretty rough, and we got a vaccine in a couple of years. So, I mean, this could easily have been that and worse. But no reason to
could have.
no reason to root for it or
there's
anything.
flu and then there's flu, and
Yeah.
if you've seen one flu, you've seen one flu.
Right. And wait 10 minutes, you'll see another one.
Yeah, pretty much. So a lot going on. Let's talk some politics.
All right.
And this isn't meant to be a victory lap, but the discussion that we've had about how infrastructure is developing,
yes,
appears to be the way infrastructure is developing.
Yes, much to the surprise of the people who are developing it, I guess.
Right. So
they claim.
The point here is that one of the very, very underappreciated facets about how Washington works is the need to save face.
Yeah, okay, yes.
Right? I mean, what we had suggested would happen is that there'd be negotiation and lots of kabuki with Manchin and Sinema.
Yeah.
And eventually what would happen is they'd come up with a bipartisan bill, and then separately the Democrats would pass whatever they need by reconciliation.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. I mean, to me, everyone's been saying that for a long time.
Right?
But
and so we talked about it on the show even.
Yes.
And, then Biden says stuff because Biden says stuff.
Yeah. Well,
he always says stuff.
Right.
And there's a quote I'll try to find that, Edward Isaac Dovere, who just wrote a book about the last election, Battle for the Soul, said, one of Biden's personal cliches that proves true for him again and again, no one ever doubts I mean what I say. The problem is I sometimes say what I mean.
Okay.
And he did.
Yeah.
And so I don't remember whether it was Thursday or Friday anymore, but on one of those days he said, look, this is a great bill and I'm really happy about it. Let's have everybody here. I think that was Thursday and we'll all celebrate. And then on Friday he said, of course, you need to pass the other thing too.
Yeah.
And the Republicans pretended to be livid.
What? Yes, right.
Because the whole idea was to act as if they didn't know this. Of course they knew it. Everybody knew it.
Yeah.
We knew it.
And even if they didn't, I mean...
But the point is you don't say that in public because it makes it appear that they caved. The whole game here is that when you're in the minority, you cannot control legislation. Filibuster or no, you can't control what's going to be passed if the votes are there.
Sure.
What you can do is you can influence it.
If the votes are there.
So you can threaten to withhold this, you can gum up that, you can try to make as much as you can over Biden gaffes in the public. And basically all of this is trying to maneuver to get whatever leverage you can to squeeze whatever you can out of an inevitable package. That's what the minority does. Some minority groups are better at it than others.
Yeah.
It's not as easy when you're in the majority, believe it or not, because you got to corral everybody and actually get votes. But Pelosi's very good at this. She's actually not as good when she's in the minority because she doesn't always gum things up as much. But, of course, it's easier to do in the Senate than it is in the House because the House is a majoritarian institution and the Senate really isn't. Yeah. So what's happening is that you have all this maneuvering in the Senate. I mean, I'm telling you stuff you already know. But the gaffe that happened, the Kinsley gaffe, is that Biden told the truth and Republicans got upset about it. And then Biden, quote, had to walk it back, which gave plenty of fodder for reporters to say, Biden made a mistake. Look what he's doing. Nothing changed. Nothing happened. And, in fact, there's a very nice piece about it by Jonathan Bernstein, Political Science. Biden's infrastructure blunder won't matter. Everybody involved is trying to shape the story to their advantage, which is normal.
That is normal, yes.
Right? Looks like there's been a lot of movement over the past few days. First, Biden explicitly linked an infrastructure deal that he had negotiated with the Republican senators on Thursday to a partisan bill that Democrats are expected to pass as well. Then Republicans bashed the president, claiming this linkage could blow the deal up. Then Democrats argued there was nothing new about the two-track process with one compromise bill and one Democratic bill. To the contrary, they said they've always been clear about that. Then the White House put out a statement apparently backing off Biden's explicit linkage, after which Republicans went back to supporting the agreement. That's a story. And it's not entirely inaccurate.
Yeah,
there's a lot of shadow
interesting.
boxing there, says Bernstein.
A little dumb, but yeah. Okay.
Right? As Congress scholars
happens.
Josh Hooter and Sarah Binder point out, Biden won't have the option of signing just one bill because it won't and can't pass that way. In the House, the liberal Democrats won't vote for the compromise bill unless there's a second piece of legislation, and their votes are probably necessary because it's unlikely that more than a handful of House Republicans will support the plan. And that means that the one bill option isn't viable, and therefore Pelosi won't put the compromise on the floor without the second bill, which means the Senate needs to pass both. And by the way, Pelosi has said that, and as Jonathan Bernstein points out, Pelosi means what she says. So that's the story. So don't get upset about, oh my gosh, Biden's caving. No, he's not. He's doing whatever he needs to do in order to get the thing passed, and the thing will pass because in the end, presidents get their own party to do what they want, more or less.
Well, yeah, I'm not too terribly worried about that. It was a little bit of a weird story. Also, I found it surprising that nobody referred to any of this, but I guess there was just more hay to be made in the other parts of the story. But just thinking about all the Republicans who were outraged at the idea of linkage, and thinking about all these same Republicans who said, I'm blocking every appointee until I get a traffic light in, Paducah or something. That happens all the time. All the time. And some of the loudest complainers are the worst offenders of the inappropriate blocking of, various nominees or all nominees or even all legislation until something totally unrelated happens, as if they've never heard of this tactic before. And these things are actually related. So, I don't know. Nonsense. And then, of course, focus on whether or not it was fair to call what Biden did to backtrack, and even if it was, did it make a serious difference in what was going to be offered?
And the reason I bring it up is because I just see so often on our side complaints, quarterback, sideline quarterback, armchair quarterback complaints about why can't the Democrats get anything done? In fact, they're getting everything done. This is part of the process. Chill.
Yes, for these bills, certainly.
For these bills. I mean,
not at all.
I'm not talking about the voter stuff, which we're going to have a whole lot of trouble with, climate change, which we're going to have a whole lot of trouble with. But on these bills, at this time, for this issue, there's an incredible amount of that's being done.
There's
and,
52 infrastructure weeks a year. Right. So, it's not infrastructure week again, is it?
Well, actually it is. And infrastructure is actually getting done. So here's the New York Times version. Infrastructure deal back on track after Biden's assurances. Moderate Republicans said they believe the $1.2 trillion bill, which they suggested they could now begin drafting, would have enough GOP support to pass the Senate.
All right.
And, of course, McConnell's flipping out and saying, we can't have that. You've got to delink it or I won't vote for it. I don't care whether you vote for it or not.
Yeah, just so long as there's another group of people who will.
Here's Pierce in ABC talking about this, which is, I think, a very important quote. I hope they just look at the bill, Manchin said on ABC's This Week, referring to progressives in the House. We have two tracks, and that's exactly what I believe is going to happen. And we've worked on the one track, and now we're going to work on the second track. But he can say it because he's not the president. He's not the one embarrassing Republicans. Right? So if Biden embarrasses Republicans by saying, look, you guys capitulated, and I think I'll take a victory lap, they're going to say, wait a minute, you can't do that. We are trying to do plausible deniability here, saying that has nothing to do with the other bill. Just let us do this one first. We're trying to corral votes.
All right.
We need Jerry Moran. We need, people who will do it as long as you don't rub it in their face.
Stop telling people what the reality is.
Yeah, well, I'm sure that there's analogies there to persuasion during elections.
Yeah, it's probably true.
You can yell at the voters and expect them to vote for you, or you can try to persuade them and expect them to vote for you. Your choice. But I guarantee you one's going to work better than the other.
All right. Let's use the one that works.
Yeah, I suppose. Are you sure progressives are going to support your bipartisan bill if they don't get a guarantee? Jonathan Karl pressed Manchin. I hope so. I hope they just look at the bill, Manchin said.
I hope so. All right.
Right? But anyway, that's what's going on. So just everybody understands what's going on here. So don't panic because, Biden blew up the whole bill. No, he didn't.
All right. Well, I didn't panic.
Well, he got Republicans upset. They're not upset. they saw an opening to get a lot of press over this, and so they took it.
All right. Well, it seems to have worked. They seem to be attuned to that.
Yeah, pretty
Watch
much. All right. Meanwhile, we still got COVID problems here. The great vaccine divide puts Republican leaders in a moral quandary. Counties that voted for Trump across the nation have lower vaccine rates, presenting a moral quandary for Republicans.
Right.
Some of the constituents could needlessly die of COVID-19 if they don't reject the partisan messaging. So what are they going to do?
Well,
probably let them die.
Yeah, yeah.
Because we got an election coming up in a couple of years.
Yeah.
I mean, let's be real about the priorities.
It's
here.
odd. I mean, these are the people that you expected to vote in it, but okay.
Right.
If they're,
Despite some of the recent
heated
rhetoric about mandatory vaccines, these have been part of our lives for many decades. Just try to enroll your kid in a school or summer camp without their polio, measles, or chickenpox shots, being up to date. And overwhelmingly, we've accepted this as one of the rules for living in a society. But as this recent study by Ariel Friedman, Rachel Gershon, and Ayelet Nizi demonstrated, growing polarization over the COVID vaccine has led to growing polarization of opinions about vaccinations in general. There used to be few partisan differences in beliefs about flu, for example, but Republicans are becoming less interested in the flu vaccine. As sociologist Jennifer Reich has noted, there's been a small but persistent population resistant to getting vaccines for decades, and that population doesn't fall into just one party. We knew that. We're in California, for example. But opposition to vaccines is increasingly becoming a core belief among some Republicans. So some Republican leaders, including former President George W. Bush, Tommy Tuberville, Roger Marshall, Shelley Moore Capito, have been publicly encouraging people to get vaccinated, and that could make a difference. But what he left off is Seth Maskett, writing this, professor of political science in the Denver Post. What he left off is Fox News arguing against it, which I think is more important than any of the politicians at this point.
Yeah, probably true. And I don't know what to tell you why they are. Between that and the other story about them robbing their constituents, Republicans are robbing and killing their most reliable voters. That's going to show up as a little bit of a reverse gerrymander.
Yeah, eventually. Middle of a crisis in southwest Missouri, from St. Louis Post-Dispatch, health officials urge vaccinations to prevent further spread. This is, of course, Missouri, which, as we've talked about on the show, as you've noticed from Worldometers, is having a bit of a problem now, probably the highest rate in the country. I saw it was getting really bad. Stacey Gamble of Battlefield, Missouri, who was vaccinated earlier this year, but she brought her 13-year-old to get vaccinated. Okay. The state's 7-day average of new confirmed cases has more than doubled since the beginning of the month, up to 560 on Sunday from 250 on June 1st. And in fact, the hospitalization rates are going up tremendously there. Somebody noted that there was less than 20 throughout the spring. This is Eric Frederick, Chief Administrative Officer of Mercy Hospital Springfield. On June 1st, the hospital had 26 COVID patients, and as of Friday, there were 99. So things are going in the wrong direction there. People just need to be aware. It's hardly over. There's debate now, and nobody knows the answer because there isn't enough data about whether or not people who got the J&J vaccine should now get a booster. Some experts say yes. Some experts say wait. CDC says wait. Nobody knows. It's not so clear that you can just walk in and get one. I suppose it depends where you live and where you're getting it from. Right. But these are all issues on the table and real life questions that sort of need to be answered now, and we don't have the answers to it.
Yes, and I would like to have them. I would also like to have an answer as to whether the gun couple from St. Louis are vaccinated. The guy is running for Senate now, and that's disconcerting, I guess, more than anything else. And I would like to know whether he's vaccinated or not. And I would like to learn that by widespread news reports that definitively tell us what his status is.
Right. Well, I can't tell you whether he's vaccinated or not, but by observation, he appears to shoot himself in the foot a lot.
Right. So I'm waiting to find out. That would, if we could remove him from the pool of candidates early on, whether he drops out or tells us what his status is in some, fashion or another, whether he intended to make an announcement or not. You know what I mean? I'd like to find out. Just wondering. Okay. Well,
so
yeah,
this
I need
is
to find out about
5:38 in the moment or two we have before the break, suggesting Americans are worried about crime, but that doesn't mean they're blaming Democrats. something that I have seen written
All right.
elsewhere. You know, it's very
Maybe
common.
try to do
Some
that.
of the conservative columnists that I follow love to immediately retweet any statistic or story they can find about, oh, crime is going up.
Yeah.
Because they simply assume that, well, that'll benefit Republicans. That's why they're doing it.
Yes.
Eric Adams appears to be ahead in the New York City mayoral primary, except we don't know that he won yet
And
because
also
it's
he's
too
a
soon.
Democrat.
Tomorrow, I guess they start doing the ranked choice voting stuff because that's the end of the absentee ballot window. And so maybe in a month or two, we'll know who won. It's a close race. I think he's up by 8 or 9 points. But there's a lot of absentee ballots out there, so we'll see what happens. And we don't know whether Wiley or Garcia will come in second if, in fact, Adams wins, which we don't know.
Yeah, doesn't mean anything.
And in the absence of knowing that, because he's an ex-cop, everybody assumes that this has something to do with crime. Except that he was a reformer who the police department hates, so, you know, that's complicated. He's black, and he was trying to end some of the racism in the department, so that doesn't fit into the conservative narrative. But clearly, New York voted for him because crime.
Yes, which is weird. I mean, the whole idea, of course, was, well, people will vote for Republicans because of crime, and are we forgetting that this is a Democratic primary somehow? And, so they're voting for Democrats because of crime, I guess. So, all right. And, of course...
Well, the thing is, Americans are divided about what the best
crime.
solution for stopping crime is. We'll talk about that after the break.
No. Are we divided as among Democrats and Republicans, or criminals and regular people?
Well, law enforcement isn't tough enough, or law enforcement is too tough.
Okay. Well, we'll find out and give you a definitive answer through ranked choice voting some point over the next 6 months. We'll be right back in 6 months.
Hi everyone, it's me, Gil. Minimal contributor to content, but regular contributor to funding for Kagro in the morning. Let's change things up from David's so very tired plea for your contributions with a plea of my own. If you want to add your voice to the show, do it. Record your own segment using your favorite recording device and send it to David. Read an article and give your opinion. Write your own essay and read that. The sky's the limit. Well, not really. Try to keep it relatively short so David doesn't have to stress about cutting it and hurting your feelings. Join the hallowed ranks of Greg Dworkin and Joan McCarter and be part of this somewhat witty deep dive into political topics with unnecessary censoring. Lend your voice to the show by sending it to kagrox@gmail.com. KAGROX@gmail.com.
Welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Net Roots Radio. We continue with our Greg Dworkin segment this Monday morning. So I don't remember where we left off. It was 600 years ago, or 2 minutes, depending. And where were we? You have any idea?
You know, people get nostalgic, and so they look often in the past and wonder about fashion, for example, and what came and what went. And, it's funny because whenever people do that, they always seem to leave out all the really bad things that people used to wear. They never seem to get nostalgic for zoot suits or bell bottoms or, any of the stuff that, like, we wore that.
Yeah, the bell bottom thing, I don't quite understand what that was supposed to be, but...
Well, that's what people wore in the 60s.
Yeah, I guess.
You should look at 60s fashion and, scratch your head and say, we did that?
Yeah, well, I do, but yeah, that one doesn't, I don't know. I mean, I guess jeans styles maybe don't make any particular sense ever, except, I don't know. First of all, I don't know anything about it, but for instance, when I used to see boot cut jeans being sold, and I figured, well, that makes sense, and just in terms of, it tells you what it's for. I don't know how it improves wearing of boots, but at least they've declared something like bell bottoms. We're not going to put any bells on our feet at any point.
No, but when you look at the bottom of the jeans and how they flare,
sure.
I
understand.
okay, I get where they get the name from.
Right. I'm just like, well, why all the extra room? I don't know. Just because. I don't know. Why is a top hat so tall? Oh, that is a good question. I don't know.
So back to the question of crime and its effects on Democrats. This particular piece by Nathaniel Rakic noticed that there was a Gallup poll, and although the discussion, particularly driven by conservative columnists, has sparked a narrative that the rise in violent crime poses a political problem for Democrats because in the eyes of columnists and pundits, everything poses a political problem for Democrats. Joe Biden said something. That's going to be a problem.
Okay.
Well, he appears to be fairly popular, and his policies are popular, and these remain popular, and that really hasn't changed any. Yes, but it'll be a problem tomorrow. Trust me, I write about these things.
All right.
Altogether, this has sparked a narrative, says Rakich, that the rise in violent crime poses a political problem for Democrats who are the ruling party and traditionally perceived as soft on crime, or softer. But at this point, it's not really clear that the crime issue will hurt Democrats and anti-police progressive politically. For starters, Americans are actually pretty divided on what the best solution to stopping crime is. In a YouGov Yahoo News poll in May, 32% of adults said that law enforcement isn't tough enough on most offenders, and 27% said law enforcement is too tough on most offenders. 18% thought law enforcement's level of toughness was about right, and 22% weren't sure. And, 40% probably couldn't remember who their name was, but that's fine. It's just that people jump to conclude things because it fits their narrative.
It's only been 6 months.
That's normal, but you just have to understand and accept that.
I guess so. I think it's a little early to be attributing any trends in anything to anybody.
Right. When asked about whether
been a long
Biden
time.
or Trump had done a better job of handling crime, 34% said Trump and 32% said Biden. And 15% thought the two were equal, and this just mirrors people's existing partisan preferences. Republicans preferred Trump, while majority Democrats preferred Biden. But that just bolsters the theory that crime isn't an issue that's changing anybody's mind. And so, it's the whole thing about caravans are going to elect Ed Gillespie, governor of Virginia, and riots around the country, and a single bombed-out looking building in a thriving city is somehow going to change everybody's mind about, Black Lives Matter.
Yes, I have been.
And we get that all the time.
I mean, there are people who continue to say, like prominent elected officials on the Republican side who continue to insist that they fully believe that entire American cities burned to the ground last year, and oddly still oppose an infrastructure deal on top of all of that. Wouldn't you want to rebuild those cities? But I guess the answer is no, because Democrats live in them. But in which case, what's the problem with the fires then? I don't know.
Other things in the news? Well, apparently Bill Barr has been talking to people. Jonathan Karl got a big interview for a book he's doing, and Bill Barr thinks that maybe Trump was going a little bit too far with this deal in the election stuff, and so he told Mitch McConnell. McConnell told Barr that I can't do anything about it because we have to win Georgia, so you have to tell Trump that he's nuts. Oh. And all this goes into the interview, and there's a piece about it. Jonathan Karl has a piece in The Atlantic. Inside William Barr's breakup with Trump in the final months of the administration, the doggedly loyal Attorney General finally had enough. And, of course, you get the impression that the interview with Barr, as with many former officials, especially with the former guy, appears to paint the interviewee as the good guy. And it's just so weird how that often happens, but nonetheless, that's what the Atlantic interview says. The HuffPost review of it has its own take. Utterly deranged. Trump has full meltdown over Bill Barr, Mitch McConnell. That's because Trump issued a statement yesterday saying they're both rhinos and they're both terrible. And, it's part of his own meltdown. Always interesting. What effect does it have on anything? I don't know. But I just think that the personality cult that loves Trump isn't going to change all that much. But, he's just going to continue to slowly bleed people around him. Other things that will affect him include the deadline, apparently, that the Manhattan DA gave the Trump organization. You have until today, presumably end of the day, 5 o'clock, to respond to us considering putting out criminal charges about your organization. What do you have to say about that?
Don't.
They announced that they were doing that. So, maybe by tomorrow we get indictments.
Okay.
Not
they're
Trump,
ranked
but
choice
people within the
indictments.
Trump organization. And why is that important? It's a money stream.
Yeah.
And once you have an organization tainted by indictment, other organizations, not individuals, stop giving to that money stream. And
Yes,
so, he uses it as
mobsters.
grift to fund his family. And so it's cutting off a source of funds. That, to me, is what all of this comes at. This doesn't put Trump in jail.
I'd like that, though.
I'd like that, but that doesn't necessarily, follow. We have to see what happens. Maybe it's, slap on the wrist stuff. But it's a public announcement that maybe if you're considering giving money, this is not the way to do it. This is not the avenue. This is not the venue.
Okay. Well, I don't know how many legit corporate actors still cut deals with the Trump organization, and although
Well,
I
they do.
mean,
There are plenty of them.
some
I mean,
must.
this is buy a hotel or rent a hotel
yeah, that's
space,
true.
all that stuff.
Some of that they still launder money that way, but even so, I mean, organized crime figures, to an extent, probably say, "Well, geez, I mean, the cops are already there. We should probably just do our deals, our illegal deals." Oh, and I'm not doing this because of his bad reputation. I'm doing this because the cops are waiting for us, and I'd rather
Right.
launder my money elsewhere, and that's fine.
Exactly.
Well, I'll take it.
And that includes foreign actors.
Yes, right. Most of them know about America having police.
Well,
Yes.
they'd rather not do it in public there.
Yeah.
Again, here's yet another different poll, not YouGov, but this is Morning Consult. Not every QAnon believer is an anti-Semite, but there's a lot of overlap between its adherents and belief in a century-old anti-Semitic hoax. Nearly 4 in 5 Americans who agree with the protocols of the Elders of Zion also believe in QAnon.
Just like weird letters, Z's and Q's.
Roughly
play
half
Scrabble with
of
these
respondents. Guys. Well, they're like really popular letters, though.
Yeah.
I mean, they're not vowels, but they're still pretty popular. Roughly half of respondents who agree with QAnon also agree that the rise of liberalism has enabled Jewish people to destroy institutions and take over the world. QAnon and protocol believers are slightly more likely than U.S. conservatives to say the Capitol rioters were seeking to protect the government. And both conspiracy-embracing groups track closely with right-leaning adults when it comes to questions about voter fraud in the 2020 presidential election.
Yes, all right.
So, very reassuring there.
Yeah, it's not a good scene, but okay. Q. Well, they've been having a hell of a time of it, and what can I tell you? I understand that there's another big batch of QAnon adherents running for Congress and for public office as well.
Yeah, we have to see which
encouraged
faction
by,
they're from.
Yeah, Marjorie
This
Taylor
one says
Greene's
more specifically,
success.
QAnon adherents, quote, identify Jewish control of the media, the banks, and the government as being behind the deep state, helping to manipulate the levers of society and undermine trust. They don't even have anything here about lasers.
No, they didn't even get to that.
The
was
group
a
has
hot
undergone
topic.
a sea change in recent months. Both Twitter Incorporated and Facebook Incorporated started cracking down on QAnon communities. What a weird convention calling Twitter Incorporated.
Yeah,
Facebook
where is that
Incorporated in print. Started cracking down on QAnon communities and content as early as last summer and sought to strengthen their moderation effects following the insurrection, effectively deplatforming the conspiracy group.
Okay, Incorporated.
Right. I guess the point there is that to say Twitter implies all its people who use it,
I
and
see.
Facebook implies Facebook users. So Facebook
guess
says means, that could be anybody.
Oh,
But
right.
Twitter Incorporated and Facebook Incorporated are essentially the front page of Daily Kos, not just the diaries.
Yeah, that makes some sense then.
I guess that's how I'm interpreting. A spokesman for Twitter
normalizing
said the
it.
company has been clear it will take strong action on behavior that's potential lead to offline harm, and since January 8th has suspended more than 150,000 accounts that were engaged in sharing QAnon-associated content at scale and were primarily dedicated to the propagation of this conspiracy theory across the service, which is kind of interesting.
All right.
Q hasn't
Yeah.
posted since December. Really, what a lot of the community is doing is they're latching on to different influencers that have built up audiences. And many of those influencers are now flourishing on less moderated spaces like Telegram. And take Ghost Ezra, for example, essentially a marginal figure when it came to QAnon, while on Twitter, who had roughly 18,000 followers, now has essentially 338 subscribers on one of the other platforms, I guess,
Okay.
on Telegram.
That doesn't sound like a lot.
Yeah.
Ghost.
Telegram
Ezra.
did not respond to a request for comment, but that doesn't
Telegram
mean QAnon has
Incorporated.
disappeared. Instead, ideas that originated there are now filtering into mainstream right-wing ideology without the name
yes.
attached.
That's true. That seems true. And
Right,
that I
and you
did
got
see
people
from
like
weekend.
Marjorie Taylor Greene, helping it along.
Yeah, And a big viral-ish video yesterday of some loony preacher or another who basically gave a whole QAnon sermon, but others were pointing out it's all the same material, but there's no mention of QAnon, and they'll pretend that maybe they'll actually mean it, that they don't know what you're talking about if you say, oh, you're one of those QAnon people. It's just sort of morphing into general anger and lunacy, that they're picking up all of the same themes without necessarily the Q branding,
Right.
which is just as dangerous. So, all right. Well, that is very weird. I don't remember the name of the preacher. Probably not worth publicizing him. But yeah, it's one of those things that, of course, makes you say, what is it with the tax exemption for these guys again? Why is he doing this? This is a thoroughly political speech, except it's crazy political speech. And, I guess we don't just, in this country, we don't simply arrest you for those things. Although if you're a big fan of Putin, maybe you'll be a big fan of arresting people for saying such things, but probably not. But yeah, one of the crazier things. Everybody's a pedophile. And by the way, look out for the big system of pedophile smuggling tunnels underneath the Capitol building and White House. There are tunnels, of course, but there are little subway cars that run in them, and people walk through them all the time and even take pictures in them. And there's just nowhere to store all your pedophilia paraphernalia, which I guess is a phrase I've been waiting to say for a long time. I don't know. That's a weird one. But anyway, yeah, he's assuring everybody that also Tom Hanks got in the mix somehow. I don't know. Oprah Winfrey, Tom Hanks, Joe Biden. Don't ask me. It doesn't make any sense. I can't help it.
Right. Well, it's not supposed to make sense. Anyway, that's the story for today. That's what I got.
Oh, all right. That's
it.
That's
the roundup from the weekend.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty good roundup of
stuff
the
I thought was interesting.
Yeah. Well, it has been. The William Barr thing we'll have to look into, if only because it's so amazingly frustrating. And it made me think in the beginning of the story, when you're talking about infrastructure, the beginning of the roundup, when McConnell was saying, well, I'm not voting for it because there's linkage, et cetera, et cetera. And I wondered if at any point McConnell had asked Bill Barr what to do about it. I know he seems to be outsourcing everything to Barr, including, right, you have to speak up. You have to say something about how crazy the president is. And I guess Barr didn't find that attractive as a prospect at that time. Although,
well, he also probably wanted to have Georgia win.
Yeah, probably. And I don't know what he hoped to escape with. Was he? Yeah, I mean, I guess he was out as Attorney General by the time Georgia rolled around, but it wasn't like he was going to risk anything. And
well, they understand how fractured the Republican Party is. It's actually Republicans in disarray, not Democrats. Yeah. And so they were willing to do anything and everything to just keep all sides on the same page and win that Georgia election. And that meant not challenging Trump in any way, shape, or form because they couldn't afford to lose a single voter, which turned out to be true because they lost.
Yeah, right. They did. They lost enough single voters that it didn't help them at all. But yeah, he's just the one there's so many aspects of this story which are the same sort of thing all over again. But it's also been a weekend full of people, I don't know, sort of pretending that they're distancing themselves from Trump. Maybe they are, maybe they're not, but Jared and Ivanka apparently spent the weekend
there's a lot of pretense. Yeah, again, that goes along with if you interview them, if they're the sources for your story, they're going to come out the heroes, just like Bill Barr will be if you interview him.
Right.
It's the same thing. People who speak to reporters in Washington are speaking to reporters not because they think you need to hear the news or because something was figured out by the reporters. It's, I got a story I want to tell, and which reporter shall I call to get my story out?
Yeah. Well, that's ultimately what happened with that one, and another in a long series of things that reveal important news that there's a significant portion of the people who receive the news, including me, who say, Again, this seems important, and it seems like the sort of thing that would have been important when you learned it, and I am somehow resentful that I had to wait for a book to be published in order to get the news from people whose job is to tell me the news that day.
Right,
I'm a little
exactly.
annoyed with this. Like Jonathan Karl, he wants to monetize it. I understand it. I want to monetize sleeping late, but I can't figure out a way. But Jonathan Karl, you're television news guy. You found out the news. Tell me what the news is. This idea of, if you pay me, I'll tell you in 6 months that the government's collapsing from the inside. Oh, well, you know what? I don't want to pay for that, but okay. I'm getting a little annoyed.
Well, I didn't say this for a book. I actually tweeted it on June 25th, so I'll just tell you this as a parting comment before I go. You really get the impression that Republicans wanted Manchin and Sinema to screw Biden over infrastructure, and when they didn't, realize they may have to do it themselves. So you'll hear lots of stuff from McConnell today about how this can't work, and I will not, and you have to, and this. He didn't want to do that. He wanted to just quietly say, well, the whole thing fell apart. I had nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
Well, Manchin and Sinema are not allowing him to do that, so now he's going to have to do it himself. Or at least he's going to have to try.
He told everybody that he had Manchin on a leash.
Yeah, but remember, here's the story here. If McConnell kills the bipartisan deal, it all gets done through reconciliation.
Yeah, I guess so.
He doesn't really have any leverage here. This is what I meant about maneuvering with the minority party when they don't have the votes, trying to get the best possible deal they can under the circumstances. So what were they able to do? They were able to lower the spending on the bipartisan part of the infrastructure deal.
Okay.
Which will just get put on the other side in the reconciliation part, but at least that way Republicans don't have their voters blaming them for spending money.
Yes. Well, okay, then that's maybe not a terrible
it's totally
strategy
understandable, but that's what all this maneuvering is.
Yes. Okay. That makes some
from
sense.
Those few handful of Republicans who actually care about governance. So far 5.
I guess so. Yeah. Well, it is interesting that I guess it all comes out the same. You squeeze in one area and like one of those like a balloon, the money just moves to a different bill, I guess, and comes through that way. Although
but that's not my fault.
No. Although there was some interesting discussion over the weekend of these arbitrary price tags that people hang on these things. Well, I don't think it should be over $2 trillion.
I held it to under $2 trillion.
Right. Exactly. And no one
the ends
knows
write themselves.
Why it, if you
Why is that important? It's not important, but it's a number that I held it under.
Yes, right. And it's round, this number. And,
but I was the one that did it. I held it under. That's what you need to know. You need to walk away with the idea that I did something.
Yeah. As opposed to, how much, why don't we total up all the infrastructure projects that we have in the country and find out how much we should have to spend to fix them and then
see
talk
what it
about
costs
that.
And then let's pay for it.
No,
I can't do that.
You don't understand.
That's not how it works here.
I can't add that many numbers. Nobody can. $2 trillion or less. The end. All right. Well, that's sort of the way things work in this country. And,
frustrating as it is. And that's why the general public doesn't pay attention to any of this.
Right.
They just want to know, did it pass or not?
I don't know what they're paying attention to. Okay. Well, we can live with that as a roundup.
And here's a pro tip or a stage whisper, however you want to put it.
Yes.
They don't pay attention to Biden gaffes either.
Yeah, probably not. I don't think anybody gets that one. They also, by the way, generally don't pay attention to procedure, which is a tragedy, but true. But also means you can do.
Well, that's why we're here.
You want.
We get to pay attention to the procedure that they don't pay attention to, which is why it's so useful on occasion for you to explain to us what's going on here. Mm-hmm. And that'll come because reconciliation is right around the corner.
Yeah, I guess so. All right. Well,
brush up on it because we'll be picking your brain on it. Okay. Why did they do that? Why did they do this? How come they didn't do it that way?
Doesn't make any sense. Yeah. All right. Well, we can. We'll get ready for that explainer, but it's not happening yet.
Not yet. First, we got to do this.
Yes, and we have to finish the Tour de France. Apparently, right. I just saw that. Apparently, there's a big story over the weekend there too. There's a process.
And as I walk out the door, don't forget about climate change. I think you mentioned it at the beginning of the show, but apparently the West Coast is melting, and that's important. I mean, literally melting.
Yeah.
Oregonians are having trouble with their electricity because the wires are melting.
Yeah.
Literally melting, and so that's a problem. and
So,
do something about it. And that's why some of the Democrats say, well, okay, well, climate change stuff has to be in the
yes, right.
reconciliation. Well, current climate changes, be it rising sea levels somehow affecting the Miami building collapse, or whether it's weather in California or Oregon or West Coast,
Detroit.
That's going to help them pass climate stuff in their reconciliation bill.
Yes.
So it's all part and parcel of the same thing. Take care, and I will talk to you on Wednesday.
Yeah. Well, I'll have to wait till Thursday.
No, I won't,
actually,
because you're not here Wednesday, right?
Yeah, right. I'm not anywhere. I just disappear from the planet and reappear on Thursday, like the guy from what was it? The Dr. Manhattan. Okay. Yeah.
So I get the day off.
Yes, that's right. And right, we have the suggestion. I think when we mentioned it last week, the suggestion for a rerun was maybe a really old one, like 5 years ago. Be interesting to see how the show has evolved. Mighty OCD suggesting rather than a 1 year ago show, maybe a 5 year ago show. I don't know.
I have a feeling I'll be interrupting you.
Yeah, most likely.
I mean, I've been interrupting you for 15 years. Why should I stop now?
That was right in the middle of it. So.
Speaking of 15 years ago.
Yes. What?
Actually, it was 2007.
Okay.
You and me.
Is that? Yeah.
In Chicago, having a drink.
Oh, yeah. Breakfast, drinks, all the meals.
That sort of stuff. We did it in Austin. We did it in Chicago.
Yeah.
Why Chicago? Because Chicago was the site of the Daily Kos presidential debate.
Yes. Right.
And one of the guys who was at the presidential debate on stage was Mike Gravel.
Right.
Who just passed.
Yes.
So rest in peace and rest in power, Mike Gravel. But, everybody has Mike Gravel stories.
Yeah. He was
our friend Scout Finch remembers that Mike Gravel came to the debate and parked his car right outside the convention center, went on stage, and participated in the debate.
Yeah.
And while he was doing that, his car got towed.
Yeah, you can't just...
Because you can't park right in front of the convention center.
Right.
Even if you're a presidential contender.
Yeah, there's no, sign you put in the window or anything that would do that. What you put a red, white, and blue rag around the handle of the car. Yeah, I don't know what you do to signal that you're there as a presidential debate participant, but the cops in Chicago don't care. That's a ticket.
Right, and my Gravel stories is I was sitting with him in the audience at a time that Marcos made himself an appearance by driving an 18-wheeler onto the stage with the Teamsters. Remember that?
Yes. How did that not get ticketed?
I don't know. Maybe he got towed. But the point is, I was sitting next to Gravel, or standing next to him when that happened.
Yeah.
He loved trucks. He loved trucks like a 4-year-old boy loves trucks.
Like Trump. Yeah.
And, all he kept saying is, I wish I were on stage. I wish I were driving that. Oh, man, I wonder if there's a way they can let me. I really want to drive that thing.
I've heard
and so I happen to know from personal experience, Mike Gravel loved trucks.
I guess so. You weren't going to catch him throwing one in a pond for a TV spot. That's for sure.
Yeah. And you really, in your own life, folks, you want somebody who loves you the way Mike Gravel loved trucks.
I guess so. The lesson was drive one of those instead of your car. I can't imagine getting your car towed, but nothing happens to the trucks. But that's just Teamster power for you, I guess.
Right. But, the funniest story, of course, is the one Jen Hayden told us, that she was walking with a group of people, or happened to be there, and Marcos happened to be walking in one direction. Mm-hmm. And Mike Gravel, who's coming for the presidential debate at Yearly Coast, which is what it was called then.
Yes.
Okay, is walking in the other direction. And somebody in Gravel's entourage there says, oh, look, there's Coase. Mm-hmm. And Gravel says, who the hell is Coase?
Okay. Right. And that's why they didn't let him drive the truck.
While at Daily Coast.
Yeah, he probably didn't.
Because, presidential contenders don't really have to know certain things. They expect their staff to tell them.
Right. Did he?
And,
well, he tried.
That's just how it works.
Yeah, and the staffer said, there's the guy, and the rest is up to you.
Well, who the hell are you? I never heard of you.
All right. Then that's why you can't drive the truck.
Well, he likes trucks. He's going to be driving. Oh, I got to meet him.
Yeah, right.
Really
that might have worked.
He's going to be the one driving the truck. I got to get to know this guy.
If it had taken place afterwards, then it would have been different, right? I don't know who he is, but he drove the truck. I got to talk to that guy.
That's all we need.
All right.
To know. So,
cool.
Okay, those stories will take you right up
Very
to the
good.
hour. So rest in
Yes.
peace, Microville.
All right. He will take your advice, I'm sure. Why not? Okay. Well, thanks very much, Greg. And yeah, we are just about coming up to the break here. I'm waiting for. Oh no, you know what? We've got it still a minute before the alarm goes off because this is the 1 minute break, and then 30 seconds till the music goes. So we can round up a couple of other quick items. I mentioned one in the climate change / bad weather vertical. I wanted to make mention of, I guess, Detroit. Somehow, I don't know what happened, why they're flooded. I imagine rain would have done it, but I didn't catch the big rainstorm or anything like that. But apparently, they've got some tremendous flooding of some of the I guess interstate highways in the area. I missed the story entirely of how the water got there, but there's only a few ways that it could have gotten there. But we'll throw that into the mix. And then I also mentioned, I guess, with process procedure and the Tour de France. I don't know what the weather is like in France, but that's going on. And over the weekend, this is bad procedure, just by way of, advice. Don't step in the way of a gigantic international bicycle race, especially if you're only doing it, I think, to get a better angle for your photo, which you're going to put on Instagram. Somebody walked out in front of the race with with a cardboard sign, taking a picture of themselves somehow, and just walked straight into the path and wrecked everybody. And apparently the person who did it is now missing and has fled the country. That country being France, I guess. Toured to something else. He's on now, he or she, I don't know exactly who, but just thought to those of you waiting an update on whatever happened to the person who caused that massive crash. They are gone, and we don't know where they went, and I don't know if there's any kind of manhunt on for them. And it might not work, especially if it's a woman. You can't manhunt a woman, can you? I don't know. Anyway, we'll be right back in 1 minute to regroup. Thanks, Greg. We'll talk to you again on Thursday. See you then. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Wow, just watching video now of the very dangerous looking crash from the Tour de France, and I am sure that they were. This article has an embedded tweet with some of the video in it saying, "Great to see spectators back involved in the sports, eh?" Yeah. After a year of COVID, did they do Tour de France last year? Did they suspend it because of COVID? It's one of the things I didn't really check into. But anyway, I guess they're just looking to wave people off the hunt for this woman by saying that the woman not only has left the country, but she is believed to be German. And she got on a flight, the newspaper here announces, as CBS News reporting here, got on a flight and is untraceable, according to CBS Sports. And I don't know whether that's because CBS Sports reporters don't know how to trace anybody, or that's the official word, and they're just saying, well, look, she's untraceable, so stop looking, just so that people don't try to, I don't know, would you go and beat somebody up because they wrecked your favorite bicyclist? She's being sued, apparently, or at least a lot of the bicyclists want to sue her, and I don't know. Anyway, object lesson there. Don't do that. It's quite ridiculous. Anyway, let's see. Other stories to round up sitting here in pocket. Let's see what... and now there's the bicycle story too as well. Let's talk a little bit about Bill Barr and what he's been up to. First with Hunter's take from the front page over at Daily Kos. And perhaps then some of the reporting. Although I guess I'm kind of loath to read the mainstream reporting on it because, really honestly, the feelings, I think, are summed up here. William Barr dishes on McConnell's cowardice, Trump as madman in self-serving version of events. So nobody comes out looking particularly good in any of this. In The Atlantic, journalist Jonathan Karl, who actually has, forum where he could have revealed all this stuff earlier, to, I assume, greater effect. I don't know. Maybe this is the greatest effect, doing it in the book, and that's why they do it. Anyway, he gives us a short look at Trump Attorney General William Barr's last weeks in power, according to William Barr himself, of course, who was kind enough to grace Carl with a series of interviews out of the innate goodness of his heart, as Hunter puts it. Oh, and because Barr is now seen by many as the most thoroughly partisan and corrupt Attorney General in a generation, which is going to seriously cut down on future speaking fees if he can't figure out how to massage the record back into something vaguely defensible. That's probably true. But, oh, by the way, I would have figured he'd landed on his feet anyway because, as you know, Bill Barr is a straight shooter, as we were assured at the beginning of his term in office. The actual news out of it is not damn much, but this is a good opportunity to revisit the first rule of news consumption: be aware of the source. From the nation's top power brokers to man-on-the-street interviewees, anyone talking to a reporter about their own doings is going to tell that reporter the most flattering version of events they think they can get away with. Many of the most important details about what Trump and his core team did in their attempts to overturn the United States election remain murky because those most in the know, like ex-House Republican turned Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, are clamming up. What we can learn from the Atlantic story is that according to William Barr is great. He's always the bravest and most integrity-filled person in the room, doing the right things despite pressure on all sides, and so on and so forth. This isn't exactly news. What might be news is that the put-upon Barr believes the time is right to mete out a bit of punishment on everyone else. Here's what we learned from Carl's interview with Barr then. First, Barr wants you to know that Senator Mitch McConnell is a gutless coward, and I'm happy to hear that. Barr is willing to recount several conversations with McConnell in which McConnell, who in public spent most of the post-election period dodging questions about Trump's increasingly outrageous and dangerous claims, pleaded with Barr to be the one who contradicted Trump by telling the world that the Trump election fraud claims were utter, well, BS. We'll use that friendly abbreviation for the term. And, by the way, I mean, hinted at here, but not said explicitly, is, of course, all the time as it was happening when Trump was getting crazier and crazier, which was always. And really, all 4 years. It's not just the end or anything. Every time he would tweet something outrageous or crazy and they would ask McConnell, what are you going to do about it or what do you think about it? He would insist that he didn't know what we were talking about. I didn't see Trump's. I don't follow Trump's tweets. I'm too busy for that. But in fact, not only had he seen them, he was in fact begging Bill Barr to do something about them because he's just a mere Senate majority leader and can't be expected to find any platform to be heard and have his pronouncements valued. It's got to be someone else that does it. Okay. McConnell told Barr in mid-November, before Georgia was an issue, that Trump's hoaxes were, quote, damaging to both the country and to the Republican Party. I guess Georgia was an issue at that point by mid-November. But the hoaxes were damaging to both the country and the Republican Party. No guesses on which of those was the more pressing concern for Mitch, but Republicans cannot be frontally attacking Trump right now because Mitch and the others were trying to keep on Trump's good side for fear that an open declaration of Biden's victory would result in an angry Trump sabotaging election chances in the two Georgia Senate runoff races. Barr was in a better position to inject some reality into Trump's claims of election fraud. Why didn't he call Ivanka? I don't know. Barr, because she doesn't do anything, ever. Barr replied, according to Barr, of course, that he was, quote, going to do it at the appropriate time. And now we find out that that is 6 months into the next administration. So, here we have one slightly interesting tidbit then. Even in Barr's own accounting, he was urged to combat Trump's damaging election hoaxes and could only muster up an assurance that he would be getting right on that eventually, after it played out a bit more. You see, in Barr's account, he was bravely using the Department of Justice to gather evidence of which claims might be true or might be false. In the actual news stories of each day, the claims being peddled by Trump's minions were brazenly fraudulent to begin with. The second tidbit is that William Barr is, along with multiple other people inside Trump's inner circle, perfectly willing to tell Carl that after Barr eventually did publicly nix Trump's claims, Trump became quite bat crap unhinged. When finally meeting Barr again, Trump had the eyes and mannerisms of a madman, says a source, which we can probably take to mean even more than usual, and Barr compared him to the madman brigadier general in Dr. Strangelove. You must hate Trump. You must hate Trump, Trump is said to have told Barr, which is a pretty dead-on example of a malignant narcissist in the throes of a decompensating episode. You there, who have asserted that reality is something other than what I have claimed it to be, you must have been plotting against me all along. Great. Super. So, again, we have a situation in which everyone around Trump was pretty damn certain he had gone off the rails, jumped the trolley, sprung a brain leak, and had become devoid of marbles, but nobody in government, from Secret Service on down, was willing to toss him in a burlap sack, tie it shut, and declare that Mike Pence was taking charge because the sitting president had developed a serious case of banana pants. The rest is not of note. Barr says Barr acted with integrity, despite everyone else in Trump's orbit pressuring him to help topple the national government. Barr says Mitch was a spineless weasel who wanted someone else to save the country from potential violence, so Mitch wouldn't have to. Barr says Trump was an unhinged, raging monster, but Barr, having integrity and stuff, was loyally willing to stay, and then 2 weeks later was forced to resign because of the same integrity after Trump continued to push the same hoaxes, and the likely consequences of those acts began to become more and more concrete. How do we sum all this up then, properly taking into account Barr's actual record of assisting Trump in hiding evidence from Congress, in fishing expeditions against Trump's prime political foe, in using the resources of his office to help discredit American intelligence officials, and in assisting Trump's government-wide purge of inspectors general, I guess I would say, watchdogs, and other whistleblowers. All the petty corruptions William Barr didn't see fit to highlight in his own interpretation of those last days. It appears that William Barr decided after Donald Trump's loss that no matter what else William Barr was willing to do for conservatism, he wasn't going to go to jail for Trump or get caught in an actual crossfire if Trump succeeded in goading violent revolution. Not so much integrity, then, as a decision that he wasn't going to go down with the sinking ship. Self-interest is the usual reason powerful people recount their lives to waiting reporters, and Barr has more damage control to do than most. So, all true, all a pretty widely held opinion, I think, from what I gathered over the weekend. It's been, well, he hasn't covered himself in glory here, that's for sure. Let's see. Other comments from over the weekend on this subject, and I did not read the Atlantic article. That was just one thing I was unwilling to do over the weekend. But as I recall, let's see, where can I find this? I think our Twitter pal NYC Southpaw had reminded everybody that, I guess, Barr's story to Jonathan Karl now is that he regarded all of Trump's, or most, if not all, of Trump's elections claims to be, as he said, BS, and dangerous BS at that, and that he disavowed it, and that he wanted to make sure that, I don't know what he wanted to make sure of, actually, but he was, again, distancing himself from it. But in his resignation letter, which is dated December 14th, well after he had decided, come to the conclusion that Trump was full of it and that this hoax business was dangerous, he's still writing, even in his resignation letter, when he's separating from the administration, still sucking up and still playing the game. Here's the tweet to that effect. The first sentence of Barr's December 14th resignation letter, which says, voter fraud allegations will continue to be pursued cuts against the thrust of Jonathan Karl's piece. This is weeks after Barr purportedly told Trump in the Oval Office that it was all BS. So he tells Trump to his face, this is all BS. But in his resignation letter, where he really doesn't have to save face at all anymore, he says, oh, don't worry, I'm leaving the office in good shape, leaving it in capable hands where they will continue to pursue these very important charges of voter fraud all over the country. Even though, he could have made a bigger statement. And I'm sure he thought, well, my resignation by itself, will help people read between the lines. Well, why read between the lines? What are you afraid of? You're resigning. You're already out. You might as well tell the truth. That's that first sentence here. I appreciate the opportunity to update you this afternoon on the department's review of voter fraud allegations in the 2020 election and how these allegations will continue to be pursued at a time, this is the next sentence, at a time when the country is so deeply divided, it is incumbent on all levels of government and all agencies acting within their purview to do all we can to ensure the integrity of elections and promote public confidence in their outcome. Therefore, I'm leaving, and you're totally right, at least until a book comes out 6 months later, which will supposedly reveal that I thought the exact opposite. All right, I don't know, I found that interesting and worth noting, alongside the fact that you probably shouldn't trust the source in all of this. Let's see. You know what? Lots of other interesting stories here. Well, where else are we going to go with this? I'm gonna jump off track slightly, and there's a piece that is in the Atlantic that I would like to spend some time reading. But I guess I've reached the end of my free articles for the month, which is problematic, and maybe the Atlantic is actually something I should probably consider. We do turn there an awful lot, but anyway, I had this story. I'll read it through the pocket version. Quinta Jurecic. I don't know how she pronounces that last name. Is it like Jurecic, like not Jurassic, but Jurecic, or is there any of those hard Slavic C's in there? Is she Jurecic or something like that by any chance? I don't know. Somebody ask her and get back to me. At any rate, the article here in the Atlantic, there's no good way to protect the presidency anymore. And I guess this plays off of, since we were just talking about the Justice Department. But as we've been talking about the Justice Department lately, with, of course, the new Attorney General, Merrick Garland there, we've gone over the various issues and the argument about what the current Justice Department is doing or ought to be doing in following up on some, let's say, poorly thought out Trump administration era policies, and how they are allowing them to continue, with the excuse generally being that the Department of Justice prefers continuity as between administrations, so that, well, for a number of reasons. One, that institutionally they like to give or leave judges and the rest of the judicial system with the impression that they can generally rely on the Justice Department to continue policies from one administration to the next, because Justice Department policies are always well thought out and thoroughly understood by the actors in the Justice Department at any given time, because they're not, after all, political actors. Of course they are, but they're trying to give every impression that they're not, so that stable minds and reasoned jurists, essentially, even if they aren't serving on the bench, will be the ones in charge of the Department of Justice in any administration. And two, when it comes to protecting the prerogatives of the presidency, they almost always are maximalist in that, and will even protect, very often, the abusive misuse of executive privileges by a previous administration, just in anticipation of their one day having a similar battle over having to disclose things from their administration, and they're hoping that if we are maximalists and permit former presidents to invoke executive privilege to protect themselves from investigation, that everyone will return the favor one day when eventually the Biden administration is out of power and, say, congressional Republicans insist this is the time now for us to use our leverage to investigate and embarrass the previous administration. Their hope is that the next, I guess, Republican Department of Justice will return the favor. I don't think that that's a wise investment, but that's kind of where they're coming from. But Quinta Jurecic, I'm guessing, maybe, has written this piece here. There's no good way to protect the presidency anymore, and I think this goes to the point. The Department of Justice is banking on a future full of upstanding presidents who are committed to the rule of law. But we may not be so lucky. That's actually just the subheader here. Let's see. When President Joe Biden announced in the weeks before his inauguration that he was committed to reestablishing an independent Justice Department, he didn't say that it was going to be easy. During the first few months of Attorney General Merrick Garland's tenure, the department has sparked ire among its critics on the left, and really all over the place, and prompted annoyed statements from the White House by taking a series of positions that seem, to some, uncomfortably close to the aggressive approaches staked out by the Trump administration. It has fought not to release a document that might cast light on Attorney General Bill Barr's effort to spin the findings of the Mueller report in then-President Donald Trump's favor. It successfully asked the court to dismiss lawsuits against both Trump and Barr over the tear gassing of protesters in Lafayette Square. It's kept up its defense of Trump in a defamation lawsuit filed by a woman who accused him of raping her. In each of these cases, the Justice Department presents itself as protecting the power of the presidency as an institution, whatever the politics of the person who happens to be sitting in the Oval Office. The department doesn't want to release the memo to Barr concerning the Mueller report because doing so would risk pruning back the executive's ability to prevent other internal documents from being released in the future. Likewise, it's protecting Trump from lawsuits over Lafayette Square and defamation because any precedent set against the former president could open up other presidents to lawsuits going forward. These are familiar positions for the department to take, and they sometimes create uncomfortable situations when an administration winds up in the position of defending its predecessor. But the especially sharp contrast between the Biden administration and its particular predecessor makes for a more uncomfortable situation than most. During his time in office, Donald Trump repurposed the presidency. That's an interesting verb to use. Repurposed the presidency in service of malice and personal gain. After Trump, is it possible or even desirable for the law to maintain a clean distinction between the office of the presidency and the person who holds it? The answer depends, in part, on whether Trump is best understood as a one-time aberration in an ongoing lineage of decent presidents, or as a man whose presidency opened the door to future leaders with no commitment to the rule of law or interest in the institutions that uphold it. All of the legal filings for which the Justice Department has recently caught flack, of all of them, it is the brief in the E. Jean Carroll case that has attracted the most outrage. In 2019, Carroll, a longtime writer and advice columnist, accused Trump of raping her in a department store dressing room in the 1990s. Trump denied the allegation, infamously, saying she's not my type, right? He's repeatedly called her a liar. Carroll sued for defamation. The Justice Department raised plenty of eyebrows when, under Barr, it first stepped in to defend Trump in court. Given Biden and Garland's rhetoric of reform, onlookers might have expected the department to drop the case under the new administration, but while the tone of the government's arguments might have changed under Garland, their substance hasn't. In its recent filing, the department explained, somewhat apologetically, that though Trump's dismissal of Carroll as a liar was crude and disrespectful, distasteful, and without question unnecessary and inappropriate, This boorishness is unrelated to the strength of the legal argument that Trump should be shielded from suit over his comments. The case, the department wrote, raises questions that implicate the institutional interests of the federal government. Basically, this is just the Justice Department normalizing Trumpism in much the same way that journalists did. You just find a framework in which his craziness doesn't sound quite so crazy. Once the news of the department's filing broke, the White House tartly announced that it was not consulted by DOJ on a decision to file this brief or its contents. In doing so, it emphasized the same distinction that Biden had promised on the campaign trail to uphold, and that Trump so often obviated, that the Justice Department, though part of the executive branch that the president controls, should nonetheless be separate and independent from the president's individual desires. Biden might not like that, but in a way, his not liking it proves the point. The department is not personally beholden to him. Independent federal law enforcement is founded on this divide, which Trump has never really bothered to understand, between the individual president and the machinery of the presidency as an institution. The same divide appears in the Justice Department's brief on the Carroll issue. The people in power come and go, but the institution perseveres. As Daphne Reynan, professor at Harvard Law School, writes, this conceptual split between the person and the office is refracted throughout American understandings of presidential power. Riffing on the historian Ernst Kantorowicz's famous description of the king's two bodies in medieval politics, Reynan terms this split the president's two bodies. I mean, that's not terribly creative, but it serves the purpose. Quinta here saying, I once argued, not entirely facetiously, that Trump's use of his personal Twitter account, and that is the real Donald Trump account, and the official POTUS account reflected that same divide. Interesting. Transitions between presidential administrations tend to put the Justice Department in the awkward position of navigating the different commitments of the two bodies. In Power Wars, a history of President Barack Obama's approach to national security law and policy, the New York Times reporter Charlie Savage describes the brand new White House's frustration with the Justice Department's decision to continue a Bush-era legal argument against disclosure of information that could reveal state secrets. Obama, who had previously criticized the Bush administration's lack of transparency, was irate when he discovered, from a story in the Times, that the department was sticking with its old approach. But the decisions that the Justice Department is making today are particularly difficult because of the nature of Trump's presidency. He was a leader who used the department as his own law firm, as Biden himself argued during a presidential debate, criticizing the DOJ's intervention to defend Trump from Carroll's lawsuit. Over and over again, Trump tried to erase the distinction between man and office by turning the machinery of government to his personal benefit. He bullied the Ukrainian president for political advantage and did his best to use his power as president to overturn the results of the 2020 election. Yet those same actions also underscored just how far Trump was from the constitutional expectation of what a president should be. He was incapable of fulfilling his sworn oath to take care that the laws be faithfully executed and to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. And the House of Representatives identified this violation in both sets of impeachment articles against him, not so much blaming him for a broken promise as correctly identifying that he had never understood or intended to deliver on that oath in the first place. The result is a somewhat absurd disjuncture between what the Justice Department now presents itself as defending on the page and the conduct that led to the department's putting those words on the page in the first place. Saying that the government has an institutional interest in shielding a sitting president from defamation lawsuits may not be wrong. The problem is that Trump's underlying actions, dismissing a credible rape allegation on the grounds that the accuser is not his type, are so egregious and so particular to Trump that to describe the resulting litigation as a matter of bland, formalistic institutional interests is itself insulting. Trump's efforts to subsume the institution of the presidency into himself and to make everything about himself endangered the Justice Department's independence. And now, the department, in an effort to protect the institution of the presidency, is shielding some of that behavior from accountability. Throughout Trump's presidency, courts struggled with the question of whether and how Trump's abhorrent personal behavior should inform judges' handling of cases involving his administration. This quandary eventually reached the Supreme Court in the form of Hawaii versus Trump, the travel ban case. The majority, led by Chief Justice Roberts, took the view that the president's repeated promises to prevent Muslims from entering the United States did not tar the entry ban for citizens of several majority Muslim countries, ostensibly as a matter of national security, as unconstitutional. Hi, it's me, David Waldman, your host for Kagro in the Morning. I have good news to report. Many more listeners like you are making critical contributions that keep our show on the air. Makes good sense, of course, and patreon.com, Patreon.com, makes it simple. Now you can make easy, secure, recurring monthly contributions to support our show. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. Maybe you'd like to thank us for helping keep you sane during the Trump era. Maybe you're looking forward to in-depth explanations of what's going on in the Biden administration. Whatever it is that keeps you listening, we need your help to keep bringing it to you. And hey, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running with those options too. Thanks again, everyone, for all of your support. We literally could not do this without you. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Let's see. We left off right in the middle of the paragraph, just winding up. Thought I could do it within the space that we gave ourselves, but I guess not. But remember what we were talking about here, the case of Hawaii versus Trump, the travel ban case. The majority, led by Roberts, took the view that the president's repeated promises to prevent Muslims from entering the country did not tar the entry ban for citizens of several majority Muslim countries, ostensibly as a matter of national security, as unconstitutional. Dissenting, Justice Sonia Sotomayor argued that the policy had, in fact, been contaminated by Trump's stated desire to discriminate. You know, when the president, quite unusually, jumps out and says, no, these are my real motivations. You don't really need to go through the entire inquiry, many of which sometimes include all sorts of tests. But again, tests devised for at least ostensibly honorable presidents who take their oaths seriously, etc., to say, you know, well, the court won't, you know, immediately just take your word for it necessarily, which, although really honestly, it's just because most presidents just don't go on the record and say stuff like that. Yes, I had illegal, unconstitutional intent in implementing this policy. They, you know, they hem and haw and claim that there were all sorts of other reasons. They look, in other words, for any other explanation that might plausibly pass. And courts, as a result, generally look around for that too and say, well, is there any non-unconstitutional reason that could be claimed for this policy, even if the president never got around to articulating it? If the government can make the argument now that there was a national security reason and back it up, even if it's flimsy backup, we'll, generally speaking, adopt that rather than addressing more dangerous precedent that's more open to varying interpretation. You know, attributing to the president some illegal motive that there's no evidence on the record he necessarily believed in, even if everybody believes anecdotally that it must have been the case. The position of the government all along has been that it's about national security, and flimsy as the excuse may be, here it is, and we as a rule will look to that rather than what many, you know, whatever it is that many people or journalists or television news reporters believe might have been the real motivation. But when you have a president who says, no, my real motivation was to discriminate against Muslims, all of the previous tests for how you evaluate things kind of go out the window. But basically it was the Roberts majority view that no, we don't listen to that stuff. We take a look at what the government is arguing. They say it's about national security. They offer this flimsy evidence that it was a real national security issue, and we'll accept that because that's the way it's always been done. And all that Sotomayor is saying is, well, that's true. That is the way it's always been done. But now it's always been done that way because presidents don't come out and say, don't listen to all the eggheads. I meant to discriminate. Now, he has said that, so we have to take that into consideration. And that was the minority position in all of this. So, in continuing to defend Trump from Carroll's suit, the Justice Department is doing its best to wall off the institutional presidency, even retroactively, from what it portrays as Trump's purely personal failings. If courts distrust an individual president and incorporate that distrust into their rulings, the effect is a judiciary less inclined to give the executive branch the benefit of the doubt and more inclined to roll back otherwise acceptable uses of presidential authority. From the Justice Department's point of view, this is a problem. But can those failings really be walled off? I mean, that's a good question, and I guess it applies in a different field. Can you wall off the Trump presidency as different from all others? It's not that we, from now on, don't believe presidents. It's that when one particular president gives you plenty of reason to believe that you ought not to be believing the government's case, i.e., he contradicts the government's case repeatedly on the record, isn't that enough to say, well, look, generally speaking, if the government argues that there's an alternative reason, and so does the president, even if he is arguing it post hoc, I guess, having read the government's brief. Oh, yeah, that's what I meant. That's one thing. But if being presented with the brief, the president refuses to utilize that cover, refuses to avail himself of that cover and says, no, I meant to discriminate, can't that be distinguished from all future presidents? It's not likely that future presidents will do that. And if they do, then fine, they failed the test. I don't understand why that doesn't make sense. Well, anyway, one way to understand a president who so thoroughly did not measure up to his oath is to argue that Trump's term in office was a blip, a mistake that won't be repeated and that shouldn't affect the traditional posture of the courts towards the executive branch. This seems to be the Justice Department's current approach: work to ensure that the Trump presidency will have as little impact as possible on the role of the president in American law, and not, coincidentally, preserve the power of the presidency by doing so. Or I said rather, and not coincidentally, but rather, and not coincidentally, there we are, preserve the power of the presidency by doing so. Critics of executive power in general might hope that the Trump administration's bad faith could sour courts across the board on aggressive assertions of executive authority. Perhaps it's harder for a new administration to say, trust us, and be believed when trust has so recently and flagrantly been betrayed. Alternatively, courts could consider whether they have confidence in the good faith of a particular president at issue, and use that to help determine how much credit the institution of the presidency deserves in any given instance. To some extent, this is already in practice. A selection of judges across the country, including Justice Sotomayor, have adopted this approach, though some make this more explicit than others. So far, the model, still in its infancy, is more of a mood than a systematic legal principle, but it has shown merit in its willingness to recognize the obvious facts of Trump's mendacity and bad faith. In staking out a position that insists on a split between president and presidency, the Justice Department is looking, in part, to prevent this model from catching on. It's easy to see the department's approach as cynical, a defense of presidential power above all. Viewed differently, though, it's almost optimistic. On his first day in office at the Justice Department, Garland promised to show the American people by word and deed that the Department of Justice pursues equal justice and adheres to the rule of law, a quiet rebuke of the previous administration, sticking to the government's usual approach of maintaining legal positions across administrations, as the department would, following a less aberrant presidency, is one way of adhering to the rule of law. But the willingness to defend Trump also speaks to a perhaps unwarranted confidence that the 45th president will remain an aberration and that a future Justice Department will not find itself in court defending the same abuses. It's a good summary of it, a little flowery and a little high-minded version of similar thoughts that we've expressed here on the show. But yeah, just generally speaking, I guess I'm more sympathetic to the Sotomayor approach of saying, yeah, you should be able to legally set the Trump administration apart. The danger, of course, is in this atmosphere where, for instance, now several dozen QAnon adherents will be run and insurrectionists, so they very often overlap, will be running for Congress. I guess at some point, you have to consider the possibility of a large contingent of such nuts, including some on the Supreme Court, and maybe some of them are already there, who knows, whereby you get into a situation where, what if a bunch of Supreme Court seats are occupied by QAnon-type insurrectionist nuts who believe things like, well, given that President Biden has been covering up the whole mess about Hunter Biden and his laptop interfering in Ukraine, we no longer trust the word of this administration either. Too bad about not being able to do that for the Trump administration. We totally would have applied the same principle to them, but we weren't on the court yet. But we're here now, and so therefore no protections for, no assertions of executive privilege, and therefore we definitely have to insist that the government disclose everything it's got about the child smuggling tunnels under the White House, of course, of which there are none. And when they don't disclose the information that we totally know is true, we hold them in contempt, and let's imprison the president for failing to turn over documents that don't exist. And ordinarily that would never make it anywhere because, no, you can't hold the president to that standard, not sitting president. But we throw that all out the window because we're separating this presidency from all others. That's the concern. And I guess we'll just admit that that could be a legitimate concern, given the fact that we might one day end up with a government full of or partially full of QAnon-style nuts. But we don't even really have to get that far to worry about the continuation of Republican foolishness and idiocy and danger to democracy like this. I mean, it's always been my guess, my theory, that the Republican theory of governance means that the next Republican administration, particularly if you don't do anything about it now, in terms of prosecuting the previous administration, including perhaps the previous president, that you're just going to get the same and more. That's always been the basic theory, just as it was during the George W. Bush administration, or following the George W. Bush administration, when we all told President Obama, if you don't do something about this, if you don't lay out that this is illegal and prosecute some people, they're just going to come back and do the same thing and more. And we didn't know at the time that it was going to be Trump, but had we known, of course, we could have predicted even worse. But I don't know. I mean, I guess given the fact that they are determined to do this, we should expect that things will only get worse at one point. And even if it doesn't happen by leaps and bounds as it did under Trump. I guess that brings me to one of the other cases that she did not focus on. She mentioned but didn't focus on. She chose to make the focus the Carroll case. But the mention of the Lafayette Square case, I feel like probably deserves a little extra attention too. It wasn't all that long ago that that case was live and pending. But about a week ago, I guess last Monday, that would be the 21st. I still have this tucked away in pocket here, is the tweet from the ACLU of the District of Columbia noting that today, that is a week ago, a federal judge did in fact dismiss their lawsuit. It was threatening to before, and now it's gone through with it and dismissed their lawsuit that held federal officers accountable for attacking Lafayette Square Park protesters with tear gas, rubber bullets, and flash bombs on June 1st, 2020. And they lay their case and claim out pretty clearly. But essentially, I mean, we discussed this when they were threatening to dismiss the suit, and now I guess it stands for the time being anyway as law. My concern is that with this standing as precedent, and this being that the courts are essentially holding that for purposes of protecting the president, the various protective services, the Secret Service, the police units that were brought in to supplement, and then, of course, all the Bureau of Prisons personnel, etc., all of whom were brought in to protect the White House and put down the protesters, because, of course, the president was claiming to everybody that they were violent protesters and that they were burning the city to the ground, which they weren't. But, I guess depending on what news channel you watch, you did or didn't believe that. But at any rate, the courts were saying that if the president needs the area cleared because he's going to go to, to St. John's Church across the street, that once the decision is made to move the president there, the protective services basically do have almost carte blanche to do what they will to remove protesters and protect the president's safety, up to and including the use of deadly force against the protesters. Why? Because the president needs protecting and wanted to go to this spot. But there's no inquiry as to whether or not it was reasonable for him to decide to go to this spot. What was the reason that he wanted to go there? They don't inquire. They just say it's just one of the powers of the presidency to decide to do that, which, again, under normal circumstances with an honorable president, makes a certain amount of sense. We can't really have an inquiry every time into every movement of the president because it just makes the presidency unworkable. Instead, we say, well, look, most presidents are normal and honorable people, and they won't simply say, they won't use the cover of wanting to go someplace as a backhanded way of suppressing First Amendment protected speech. If the president needs to go to St. John's Church, there's a reason for it, and probably a pretty good one. But as we know from Trump, no, there wasn't one. And he just wanted to go and have his picture taken holding a Bible in front of this church as an assertion of his power, and what he said was his right to use whatever force he wanted against the protesters. That was another of the developments of this weekend. And I guess even last weekend, reports, again, sort of insider reports coming out in book form of Trump meeting in the Oval Office with people and saying, look, the way to deal with protesters is to shoot them, to crack their heads open, to kill them. And I want to even use the army and invoke the Insurrection Act in order to do it. And luckily, our new heroes of the Republic, who didn't do anything else, stood in the way of his doing so and actually advised him against it. And I'm sure that sent him into a tizzy, according to other reporting besides Jonathan Karls. I forget who was the reporters of the moment. Oh, it was the folks who've been excerpting their book in the Washington Post all week, last week. We're talking about that. Anyway, the issue here is that he's perfectly willing to use the legal cover that courts give to the president because all presidents, presumably before Trump and presumably after, were, honorable people of integrity who would only go to St. John's Church for some super serious reason. There's a meeting scheduled there 2 months ago, and I agreed to go. And that'd be one thing. But the idea for Trump, of course, was I just want to show that I can make cops crack heads. I mean, he went over to the church with the Bible. Now, the reason most people go to churches with Bibles is to go into the church and pray with that Bible. Or at least stand outside the church and open up the Bible and read something. But he didn't even, what are you supposed to say? He went to the church. He didn't go in it. He didn't speak to the clergy from the church and assure them that they were going to be made safe by federal officers. He held up the Bible and had the picture taken. He didn't bother to, well, he didn't hold it right side up, for one thing. He didn't open it and read anything or pretend to read anything. And, you know, as stupid as it is to say, well, you know, could the ruling have depended on whether or not he opens the book or not? Nah, not all by itself, but perhaps the totality of circumstances. You could have told you something about the nature of his visit and the decision to have it. What it worries me is, I've expressed this on Twitter, and I think probably the first time they threatened to dismiss this suit, we expressed it on the show, is that now a president like Trump would basically be handed a decision like this, and as they explain it to him, and say, well, basically the police and Secret Service can do anything they want to protesters in order to safeguard your safety. He now says, oh, so if I'm sitting in the White House and I say, and I note that there is a protest that I don't like outside the White House, it's in Lafayette Square Park, and I say, I want to go, for reasons unknown, to that spot, which is currently occupied by that protest over there. If I say I want to go there, the police and the Secret Service have to protect me. And in order to protect me, they can do anything they want to clear this area out. And given that they're going to want a wide berth, they're probably going to beat some people. Maybe even tear gas them. Maybe even shoot them. If I insist on it. If I say I want to go quickly enough and they can't move those people out of the way, but I want to be there in 5 minutes, you know, how are you going to clear this area in 5 minutes without excessive force? Well, what I really want here is excessive force to be used against First Amendment protesters. And it's there's an easy parallel to the Hawaii case that was mentioned in the previous article, right? If the president says, well, you know, I just want to show solidarity with the nation and to pray for our unity. And where do I pray? I pray in that church, and it's across the street. Right now there's protesters in the way. I'm going to take my Bible, I'm going to go over there, I'm going to pray for unity. Like, it could be a premise thin as that ordinary judicial canon would agree, you know, well, we can't really, how do you pry into the validity of something like that? It's being said, and we kind of have to take it on at face value. But if the president says, no, the real reason I want to do this is to discriminate against Muslims, you don't understand. Or no, the real reason I want to do this is because I heard that if I say I want to go there, cops have to crack heads of the people who are in my way. That's why I did it. How do you evaluate that? Now, he hasn't said that yet, at least not directly on that point. Although now there's reporting that he was, in fact, saying that. I do want to shoot them. I do want to crack their heads. You know, maybe you do put this together. But the worry is that in the future, a president like Trump or a successor to Trump, and now we have to imagine that everybody's going to be a successor. Every Republican is a successor to Trump, just by definition, but they might pick up his policies and ideas and the court precedents he's been handed and say, I understand this dismissal to mean that if the president says, for whatever reason, because remember, courts won't look into it normally, that he wants to go to this spot, that the police and the Secret Service are obligated to clear it and that they may use any level of force that they want to do so, then if I'm sitting in the White House and I turn on the TV because I'm addicted to cable television and I see that there's a protest that's anti-Trump in some way or anti-whatever, whoever's the next president, and it's taking place in, you know, pick your location. It really doesn't matter, but it's happening in Las Vegas. Unlikely, but it's happening in Las Vegas. And it's very insulting to me personally as president. Can I say, well, I want to have an event right now in Las Vegas, not just anywhere in Las Vegas, right there. They're protesting in front of the Bellagio. I don't know why they would be doing that. It's a nice, maybe the water show. It's hot. They think, okay, we're going to do it at the Bellagio. Well, I want to have an event at the Bellagio, and I want to have it now. I'm leaving now. I'm walking out the door, the south, I guess, door. I'm going to walk over. That helicopter better be there. I'm on my way to Andrews. We're going to Las Vegas now. Start clearing the area. You know, and logistics people, advanced people might say, well, I don't understand. you want to go to Las Vegas. Why? No reason. Now, a president who's worried about the ability of himself and future presidents to do the same thing, to exercise maximum executive power, will say, because I believe it will help the unity of the United States and it's something national security. And an idiot president like Donald Trump will say, because I heard that if I need to go there, the cops have to crack the heads of everybody who was there, and that it's allowed by the court. You're now allowed to shoot protesters if I say I want to go there, and the court said that they don't care and they will never ask why I want to go there, so don't ask. Let's just go. I want the heads to be cracked. At some point you would hope that a court would say, gosh, if you just blurt it out like that, we have to hold it against you. That's the Sotomayor position in the Hawaii case. The Roberts position, the majority position, is no. In order to keep things simple, we never ask really about the validity of what the president wants to do here and why he wants to do it. Even if he says, and we don't ask, and he says, I only want to do it to hurt people, we still won't do anything because we'll just assume, I guess the assumption is that the Justice Department won't come to the court and say that the real reason was to hurt people. They'll come and say there was a national security. They will normalize. They will do the job that that so much of the media did, trying to take his bumbling, stumbling half sentences and turn them into pronouncements of policy, for instance. But they'll do the job of taking his unfortunate admission that he really only did this thing to hurt people and to see them hurt, like physically, and turn it into, well, that's not what he meant. What he really meant was there was a higher-minded purpose. That photo op of the Bible at the church was for national unity and showing people that Washington, D.C. was still in control and don't get out of hand. And if you allow that and ignore the out loud pronouncements that I was just doing it to harm people, then you're almost guaranteed to get more of the same. So as it stands now, I just thought I'd reiterate this. Any president, I guess, this president, the next president, whatever, can say, when I see what a protest that would ordinarily be viewed by everyone serious as protected First Amendment protest, I can now obviate all First Amendment protections. I mean, if I want to. Or again, they're assuming that a nice president won't do that. Nice, Mr. President. Nice, Madam President. You agreed to uphold the Constitution, et cetera, and preserve, protect, and defend it, not attack it and erase the First Amendment. Who would erase the First Amendment? We all swear that we love the First Amendment, right? So instead, you just say, well, it's not that I don't love the First Amendment, it's that I got to be there at that spot right now. And sometimes that'll be tremendously transparent and obvious what you're doing, but this ruling gives any president the opportunity to simply say, to hell with the First Amendment, I want to stand there. Do I want to do anything? Do I want to pronounce anything aloud? Do I want to announce a new policy? Do I want to read the Bible? Do I want to, sit in a lawn chair and catch some rays? It doesn't matter what the reason is, and I never have to state it. Just my desire to go. And that's the end of the First Amendment as far as those protesters are concerned. Not to mention the fact that deadly force can be employed to stop them. That seems like a bad place to leave things for any president, really, but certainly for the next Republican president. Just as we said at the end of the George W. Bush administration, and as I said personally, like actually face-to-face with Obama, if you leave these precedents in place, the next president will do something so ridiculous. You won't even, it'll do so ridiculous, you won't even believe it. Be unbelievable. And I don't know. I guess it was just too difficult to imagine that being the case, given how extraordinary some of the things George W. Bush was claiming. But it happened, and it came from out of left field, or I guess out of right field in this case, and we got Trump. And I don't know who's next, and I don't know who the next successor is, and people are always saying the real thing to look out for is a more intelligent authoritarian. But I think an even dumber one is possible, and two, could be more dangerous, and I don't know. I don't know which is more dangerous, a totally stupid one or an intelligent one, but it doesn't matter. It's likely that we'll get another one, and to hand a precedent like this over on the premise that, well, 44 presidents before these two, plus one other one, the 46th president, were pretty reasonable. I don't know. It doesn't seem like good planning to me. Let's say it that way. All right. There's plenty more, of course, to address throughout the rest of the week. I just thought I would head back so that I could treat that ACLU case a little bit. Lots to catch up on, lots of stupid little things, lots of overarching stories, and lots of time to do it for the rest of the week, except for Wednesday. But tomorrow will be normal. We'll be back with Joan McCarter, and we'll catch up on what's happening on Capitol Hill and pick up a couple of these other stupid stories and make them intelligent, or pound them as close to intelligent shape as possible. For now, time to hand the microphone over for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Justice Putnam. What's he got on tap? Let's take a quick look. Trump-allied Republicans are getting help from Fox News. What? Really? Yes, with their attacks on General Mark Milley. Yeah, love the military until they say something bad about our guy.
From networksradio.com, you have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Plenty more, of course, where that came from, so do stay tuned for all the most interesting and esoteric stories from around the country and around the world. Man, it's not looking so good there, I must say. But anything that Justice can put together in the broiling heat in the Pacific Northwest, it's much appreciated. Try your best to stay cool, Justice. See you tomorrow.